we cut that one out.
Is it
fired.
recording? No, it's not. No, this.
New tank setup.
You gotta cut
New
New
that out.
tank
tank setup. You're thinking about a saltwater
Yep.
tank.
What up, everybody? It's Ted here for New Wave After Dark. This week we are talking about, drumroll please, a new tank. You're thinking about getting your new tank going. And what is the first step and all the way down to your last step? How are you going to get that beautiful tank into your house? I think we're going to cover a lot of the good basic conversations
You
about
hired
that
New
and
Wave.
things like that. Caesar will lift any size tank by himself.
Yes.
I've seen it happen. It works perfectly. Never
Yes.
a hiccup.
Threw it right on his shoulder. Got to go. So I'm going to start with the question, the age-old question, and that is, does size matter?
Jen, we're trying to keep it PC here.
So there's nano tanks, there's pico tanks, there's huge tanks, all of the things and the stuff.
Yes.
So you're thinking about a tank. You need to think about a couple other things first before you pick your aquarium. That is highly recommended. You don't just go and pick one and say it'll work.
Yep.
Where do you start? Do you start with the placement of your tank? Do you start with what do you want in your tank? Do you start with your budget? What do you start with?
You start with going to New Wave.
Start with going to New Wave. There you go.
Get ideas.
So what we're doing is this has been a project of mine, is like the top 10 questions of when you're getting a new tank. What should you think about? And I think what we start with is talking about, what I talk about is like your dream fish. So you almost make like a dream board. Like, I want this tank. I need to have, a lot of people are like, what are your need to have fish? Like, I need to have Nemo. Okay. I need to have Dory. Okay. There's very different size tanks that you need to have for those fish.
I need to have a masked angel.
There you go. No one needs to
Do I
have
want to
masked angel.
fish only? Do I want to reef?
Yeah. So all of those questions will be personal. And it's what I recommend doing is, everyone, when you get inspired by a tank or get inspired to get a tank, what is it that you saw that you wanted? And then go from there. Because that'll determine all of the other things. And then picking a spot in your home to put said aquarium is what I think is the next logical step, because you obviously don't want it next to a window for draft, use natural sunlight. And I think a lot of people to make that mistake is they put it in an area that they want to fill a spot that they don't really see. Like, people come in, I have this spot at the end of my stairs and I'm just going to put it there because I don't have anything else to put there. You don't go and visit it.
Nope.
So this is something that you're going to want to be able to see. You want to display. I mean, you're going to spend time and money on it. And you want, put it in a location that makes sense.
Yeah. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So.
It is.
Yep.
Yep.
And a lot of the time it's meant for a family building activity too. So you want to make sure that we're including our family in it. If we're putting it into our office, then guess what? Little Peter Parker and little Becky Sue aren't going to come into
Becky
their
Sue.
part.
Peter
Into
Parker,
their-
huh?
Yeah.
Do you like those?
Yeah.
I was trying to come up with good comic book names to reference it. So that's where those
Yeah.
went from.
I think space is really important, but it shouldn't discourage anyone, even if you're in like a studio apartment in
Yep.
New York City. Like, there are tanks for you. There are 10-gallon cubes from Waterbox
What-
and,
what-
and other
Absolutely.
tanks.
There's even
So-
Pico
But being
tanks out there.
realistic too, and saying, okay, this is the space I have, and then the most boring part of the whole process is budget.
Oh,
You
had to bring
and
up the
being
budget.
realistic about. So I mean, if you want this massive reef tank, 500, 600, even 100 gallons, and you have a $500 budget, I just wouldn't recommend that size tank for you.
Yep.
So being realistic, there are options for everyone in any price range. But again, remembering that if you are limited in financially, that you should pick something that fits for your needs.
I think those are the biggest three factors when deciding sort of what size tank do you want. And one of those factors might be weighted heavier than others. It depends on you and your situation. If you are on a budget, you're going to obviously weigh the budget factor of the tank more than the size or, what things you want in it. If budget and you have a huge house, it doesn't really matter too much, those two factors, then obviously what you're going to put in it is going to be the major factor. So it's going to be up to you to kind of decide, but those are the three major things you
I
definitely
agree.
have to think about.
And then once you pick your spot, so if you have this massive wall and you put a 10-gallon, I'm going to tell you, you're going to be sad.
It's gonna look weird.
Yep.
gonna look
And
off.
if you have a really tight spot and you're going to cram it where you can't move anything around and you aren't able to service the tank, that's going to be a problem too. So, I mean, once you pick your size of your tank, but also keeping in the back of your mind the reason why you got into this. So if you do in fact want a blue hippo or a dory fish, you cannot get a 50-gallon all-in-one. That's just, I'm sorry. I'm going to be a jerk about it because, I mean, they get, 8 to or 12 plus
12,
inches. And that's real. And
cruelty.
I'm gonna stir the pot here. They will not grow to the size of your aquarium. That is not even a thing.
Nope,
So so whatever fish you choose, I always start with customers or clients saying, what are your top 3 dream fish? And then we plan from there. Because that also will determine how we structure and how we filter and how we light the tank as well. So, I mean, I know there's so many different aspects of actually designing an aquarium, but those are the fun ones.
Yep.
Like pick if you want Nemo, you can do a 10-gallon, you can do a 10 million gallon tank. If you want NEMS, we'll design it a little bit differently than if you want all SPS or so I mean those questions come later. But as I think as a baseline recommendation, most people, I'd say 99% of people that come in never say, gosh, I wish I would have went smaller, unless you are in that 8 to 1,000 gallon tank size.
Or if you're like me and you move almost every year, then it's like
that's fair. And if you move a lot, then that is fair. But most times we recommend, budget permitting, the largest size tank that fits in your spot. Because again, like anything else, you grow into it, then you want more and more and more, and then you get what we call MTS, and that's multiple tank syndrome, where you're like, I need to have masked angels that eat all of my Welsos, so now I need to have a different tank. I mean, this is just hypothetical, as we watched it yesterday.
And we're watching
We don't
it
know
again
anyone like
today.
that.
I know, again,
It
I'm
took
not
a chunk out of the other one.
okay.
Yankees,
Well, anyway,
sorry.
Welsos, now I need a new tank for my LPS, so that happened. But that's too small. You see,
That's true.
So now again, it goes back to, what fish do you want? What is your budget? What is your location? And then it becomes, what kind of tank do you want? Like, do you want a rimless tank? Do you want? I mean, I
A
think
tank in the wall. Do you want?
do you want an all-in-one? Do you want? Yeah, where are you going to put your filtration? All that other.
And I think
Custom made or
before we move on from that, what you said, getting the biggest tank you can for your size and your budget. To add along with that, the bigger size you go with is generally going to be better, just for the stability aspect
That's
of
true.
it.
Yep.
You have the
absolutely.
more water volume you have. If you think about it percentage wise, the less drastic any changes are going to be. So that's why when customers ask me, I basically give them verbatim what Jen said. Is like, whatever your budget is and whatever your size is, just fill it up as big as you can. So
Yep. And I think it's important too, when people want these huge aquariums, you need to realize, unless you're super patient and you want to see your stuff grow over a long period of time, the bigger aquarium that you get, though, if you extend yourself, you do have to fill it. So it's kind of one of those like wah, wah moments when you get this huge tank and then your budget to fill the tank is like $500, and then you get what I call bubble gum, like little frags here and randomly. And that works a lot for a lot of people that want to see it grow. But if you're more of an instant person than an instant gratification, you need it like full tomorrow, then I definitely suggest, looking at your budget realistically and thinking about, yes, you want to build this beautiful glass enclosure, but you also want to fill it with
the other mistake that people make is that even they pick their size tank and everything and they have a budget, but they're not thinking about other things. For example, you're going to have to put a heater in there. You're going to have to put a light in there. You're going to have to put all this other equipment, and they don't think on that.
And I think people with nano tanks sometimes don't think that either, because just because it's smaller you still need the same equipment.
Yes.
you'll need a heater.
You'll still need
a little power
You'll
head or
still need a
something.
power head. You'll still need a protein skimmer. You still need lighting. So and even with fish only versus reef tanks, you're still gonna need that skimmer. I know that there's good people that are gonna argue with me, but I mean, you're going to need a skimmer, and you're going to need lighting, and you're going to, yes, you might not need as intensive lighting, but I mean, you have to match what you're going for. And so what I always tell people is, they're like, well, I want a reef tank, but I'm going to do like just minimal lighting now and upgrade later? And my response always, it generally is either let's start with a fish only then, and we can make
Build.
beautiful fish only systems, or if you're buying lighting, I mean, lighting is what you get what you pay for
Oh,
at
yeah.
this time in the game, in this day and age. So you get what you pay for. So if you buy less intense lighting, what people say, now say you pay $100 for it, and then in 3 months you want your actual corals, and now you're going to pay $500. Now you've paid 20% more than you would have paid in the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah.
The
So
other
save
thing,
up and then get it done right.
yeah, the other thing is when it comes to equipment, usually people come in and they're like, well, my budget is small and I have this tank and I want to do this and that and I want to put this coral in there. But the problem is they start to give you a list of the equipment, and for lighting, they got a China box. For skimmers, they went to Petco and bought a
Yeah.
skimmer. And then it's like, okay, so if you think about it, how much money have you spent on all this coral? And how much money did you spend on the coral that you already killed?
Yep.
You could have had those two things and probably a little left over.
Yep.
With
So-
the better stuff.
And I always say there's no more literal way to flush your money down the toilet than to literally take a coral and flush it down the toilet.
Yeah.
That's dead.
Yep.
So I mean, knowing what basic equipment that you need, and we've done what I'm also talking about doing is like the top equipment that you need to start a new tank, for reef tank, for fish only, for whatever. But I mean, taking into consideration, and then you know what, it's all a patience game anyway. So if you can't get the skimmer that you want today, save up for, ask for birthdays or whatnot. I mean,
We do have financing.
and we do have financing too. So I mean, it is an option because you will save in the long run.
Absolutely.
And hindsight is always 2020.
Yeah. And I think going along with budget too, like you guys can, make your own numbers or tell me what you think, but I would say whatever your total budget is for equipment, tank, the entire setup, dry goods wise, double that. And that's what you're going to spend on livestock.
I would agree.
Yeah, I would
That's
definitely
actually,
agree.
yeah, I think if we broke it down, I'd wonder what it would be. I mean, and that's for the average person. I mean,
If you're doing a reef tank, for
yeah,
example.
and if you want
Yep.
masked angels, that's not going to work. And it's not going to work in a reef tank anyway, just so you know.
I can tell it's really hurting.
I'm very upset about this.
I can
I was
understand.
already mad when he got them. So anyway, I mean, I'm coming from a place where, and this is a true fact, my childhood dog's name was Budget. That's true. So I mean, if you didn't have it in the bank, you didn't get to have it. Period. So I'm really good at providing our clients or customers with whatever budget you are, getting them in the tank that they want at the budget that they can afford.
And just
And
keep in mind, you're not just going to walk in and that's the only money you're going to spend and you walk out and you have a tank.
No.
And also, too, people find great deals on used glass, like or used tanks or glass or acrylic or whatnot. The glass is actually one of the cheapest parts of the whole thing. So, again, remembering if you get a 600-gallon tank, you need a skimmer that's going to run a 600-gallon tank. So that's also part of it as well.
And thinking
Not
about
light bioload.
Yeah, and thinking about into the future too.
Yes.
Like when
Filling
you
it
have
up.
your corals established, you're going to spend more money on dosing, and you're going to spend more money on
On
this
water
equipment to maintain it,
changes.
and salt,
lighting
and,
and all
Yep.
of the good
Electricity.
stuff. Yep.
Going from a 4-foot tank to a 6-foot tank is not just, it's only 30 extra gallons or 40 or 100. It's, an extra light. It's a larger
Probably an extra
skimmer. It's
pump.
exponential.
So what do you think is the price per gallon?
I don't know.
that would be a good thing to break down.
Yeah, it
I
would.
don't know. And you're saying like a fully functioning.
Let's say you want a
Full system.
75-gallon tank.
How much is that going to cost me?
So I guess what you could do, I mean, because it would just depend on if you're going to automate it, if you're going to have Apex, but you could do your standard and then an upgrade.
Yep.
But I mean,
A
even if
deluxe
you don't
kit
have
and
an
a regular
Apex,
kit.
I'm one of the people that say don't skimp on the important things like
Skimmer
lighting,
and lighting.
skimmer, and probably a return pump.
Yeah, I would agree
Well,
with
and
those.
why? Because the return pump is your heart line
Yep.
or
Mhm.
your heartbeat of your tank. I mean,
Yep.
so that goes out on a Friday night at midnight. There's nobody open, and that's what I mean. So that's I always suggest don't buy a used return pump.
I would agree.
Just
Same
keep
with your
yeah,
heater.
and same with heaters, yeah. But lighting, I mean, what do corals need? If you're choosing a reef tank, what do corals need? They need clean and consistency. Clean water and consistency and great lighting because they're photosynthetic. So, I mean, you're getting the clean consistency from skimming, your return pump, and then you're getting the lighting. Lighting is one of those things you just can't skimp on.
Yep. If you skimp on it, I think it shows because A, your corals won't grow the way that you want them to go, and B, they won't look the way that you want them to.
You'll have a tank and you'll have corals alive, but
You will, and you'll have a whole bunch of algae.
We're still gonna get comments out there of people that are, I have China lights and they grow.
And for some people they do, but if you've looked at, I mean, and BRS did this too, and I think a couple other companies have done the comparisons between them, and also the risks and the fire risks of some of those
Other ones.
is a big deal. So if you value, maybe your home, and not, I mean, not all of them start on fire. I'm not saying that, but I mean, there's a reason, and a lot of it depends on like where the LEDs, like what part of the run they were when they're used. I know that there's a whole science behind that.
And to be honest, eventually you're gonna migrate
Yes, true.
to the nice thing where you can control it. Because in the minute you have the budget, the money, you're gonna be like, I want that light.
And the second you get to see it firsthand, and then you really see what the corals look like under that light. For me,
Right.
that's what did it for me. Is I went with the budget light at first, and then I kind of kept seeing the nicer light and the coral looking under the nicer light, and I was
you,
like,
you can you
wow.
can tell. Yeah.
Yep, you can
people
definitely
come in
tell.
and like, I bought that coral. It looks nothing like that in my tank.
Yep, and then you go, what are you running at home? And they're like, oh, I have a strip light over it. Well, there's a great
So that's
sign.
actually really a good thing too, because
Yeah.
people are like, my tank looks pretty bright, and I have a lot of. So that it goes back to like almost like, what are your water parameters? Good.
Good.
What
They're
is good?
perfect.
They're ideal. So what is your light? Well, it's good.
It works.
Well, do you know your par? I'm not sure, but it's bright. Well, I mean, we have proven time and time again that your eyes are actually not.
Nowhere
Not a
near-
good indicator of the intensity of light at all.
Yeah.
And secondly, I mean, I always use this example with customers. I'm like, so if I go out in the winter in my swimsuit, am I going to get a sunburn because it's bright outside? No, I'm going to get frostbite.
Yep.
So in the summer, though, I guess to my eyes, the same amount of brightness, but the intensity is totally different. So, I mean, just because you have bright lights on your tank doesn't mean that it's actually usable at all to your corals or the spectrum.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Is the spectrum's huge too. You look at Radions versus some of the China boxes. They'll just have white, maybe a UV light, and blue on the cheaper ones, but
Or
with the-
reds and
yeah,
greens, which we
Radion-
all know that reds and greens are great,
Radion-
absolutely
growth.
great
Radions have
for
all of
algae
it.
growth. I mean, there's a reason why your refugium light is red.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you
Cool.
can control the spectrum a lot more with these, smart name brand lights.
Well, I just like that they can do anything and everything you want.
Well, and let's
be
be
honest.
honest. I mean, when I started New Wave almost 8 years ago, I could not afford to put LEDs over the entire store.
Yep.
So I could afford two. I could put two on the front display, and then I had halides running on some. I had T5s running on some. And over time, I migrated to all LEDs for several reasons. But I still have those original LEDs, which were Radians. Those, I mean, they're Gen 3s and they're still running. So, I mean, you buy them now and then you have them for a long period of time. I mean, that's 8 years. I mean, there's so few things in technology base that you'd have ever. I mean, what did your cell phone look like 8 years ago? I'm telling you what, it probably was.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's probably those Nokia bricks.
Oh, I have that one in my desk. It's purple and it lived for
Yep.
8 minutes.
Yep.
I mean,
And the resale value and just
The
on Radions too. Like
yep.
They don't deplenish their value.
No.
not a whole lot. No, it takes a while. So
It's a lot of good companies, top brands for lighting too, which we can go through our favorites at a different time. But I mean, again, looking at going back to the basics of what do you want to see in your aquarium? I mean, if you have a lower light system, what is the spread of your lighting? What is the intensity? What can you get away with? How deep is your tank? That's another thing too. I think a lot of people don't realize that fish don't really swim up and down. So having a super deep tank really doesn't add a lot of value. Plus, it's the surface area that you have for oxygen throughout the tank, and then also lighting it from top to bottom
It's
is
gonna be
a
hard.
number one challenge, because then you blast it with light on the top and have nothing on the bottom. So you see these tanks, you might have the perfect spot that you could put a 4 foot tall by 12-inch wide tank that you're for the beginning of it, it's going to be a maintenance nightmare, but also you're going to have serious problems with oxygen levels, pH levels, and lighting, all of the things.
Yep.
So basically, if you get a tank, even if it's a small one, you should probably make sure that you have the right equipment for that tank.
Yeah.
And
So you don't-
splurge on the things we
So
just
you
mentioned.
don't
Yeah.
so you don't end
Splurge
up
on your lighting.
spending more money on dead coral and replacing something.
Yeah, I
just
think Jen made a
start
great
right.
point about when you started off and you're like, oh, I'm just going to upgrade eventually. And it's like, well, why buy it twice when you can buy it once?
Right. And so, I mean, and there are ways of doing it, obviously, on a budget. There are ways, I mean, if you're going to buy used equipment, which we can, I can also make a list of brands too that I would recommend that if you're looking for used equipment, these brands are the ones that you should stick with that have, really good customer service or really good reputation, bang for your buck. And then also performance is a big deal.
Absolutely.
So I mean, because a good deal is only a good deal if it's
it
actually
works.
doing what it's supposed to.
Yep.
So I don't know how many of our clients have found great deals. I'm not going to mention any names, but buying all this used equipment, and then we go to set it up and it doesn't work at all, or they need new bulbs, new ballast, new this, new that, and it ends up not being a great deal at all.
And you get a warranty when you buy new.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's true.
Which is pretty nice.
Yeah, and then I mean, also with us buying from New Wave, we're platinum dealers for all these people, so we have personal sales reps for all of them. So customer support is right there, and I think now customer support is picked up a notch farther than it has in decades or years.
Oh, yeah.
For sure, because I mean, people's jobs are at stake.
Yeah.
So people are picking up the pace.
Mm-hmm.
And lighting, and I know I'm going to stir the pot a little bit and then we move it, but lighting, I feel like has kind of reached like the big top brands are kind of in that space, and they've there's not a whole bunch of extra things depending on generations of lights that they can do that you would actually like. I think a Gen 3 Radian would grow corals the same as, I mean, yes, the spread would be different than the Gen 6s, but I know. But they're good stuff.
Ecotech, we love you.
Yeah.
No, but I'm saying like that they've built a product that can stand the test of time.
What
I
she's
would agree
saying
with
is they're it's the same thing, just making it better every time.
It's like
Yep.
Apple with the iPhone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they've pretty much perfected the design.
Yep.
Now
and
it's
then
just
so I mean, because then you go back to the graveyard that I have outside, and you go to the original Solaris LED. I mean, I'm saying like I paid $4,000 for that light, and I'm still angry about it. And it weighs 50 pounds, and all of the other problems that you can't buy the parts for it. So those days are gone. Where every year, like we use cell phones. I mean, they've come so far, but now basically the cell phone looks the same, does the same things. Yes, there's a few extra features, but that's why it is a good investment. It's not one of those, I'm going to have to do it every year or every other year.
Yeah.
Unless they come up with something else than LEDs.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think they're just making, like you said, the product is just better and better.
Well, and like
Yep.
we said,
Same thing,
the resale value is good for most of the major brands for LED lighting. So I mean, you could be that person that when a new one comes out, you buy it and then you resell it.
Sell the other ones.
So
But again, you go back to if you're gonna buy, junk, your resale value is gonna be junk. If you're gonna
Yep.
buy good, your resale value is gonna be really high.
absolutely.
And there's always people looking for those because they're great.
Mhm.
I mean, like I said, we're running some of them. I mean, now we've upgraded. We have Gen 6s, and we're running AIs, and we're running all the major brands. We're running Skies. We're running all of the things, but they're all really, really good options that are gonna last. And I think that's the important part too, because I mean, your corals need clean, consistent, and strong, intense lighting. And so if you buy lights or any equipment that goes out, then there's a huge change, and you want to avoid that
Yeah.
anyway.
And I think if you're looking at some of the cheaper lighting, just take a look at some of the average par levels in the ocean, and you'd be surprised at how
It's
much light
ridiculous.
these corals are getting.
Yes.
So so when I was in Indonesia last time, and for low tide, so you see the pastel colored acros, these huge tabling acros, right?
Mhm.
And they're out of water for like a long time during low tide, and here's me splashing them, and then thinking like, well, I'm not going to be here on Thursday. Like no one else is splashing. This acro's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's been
But
here
I
long
mean,
enough.
it's under direct sunlight, so
Or clams.
clams too.
that's
That's
another
what
one.
I noticed too in Indonesia. You walk on some of the rocks, and they just be spraying up because they're like the Croceas, they need intense lighting. Like when people put clams on the bottom of their tank because that's where they think that they belong, they're not. They just aren't getting the lighting they need unless
And your
you're
100
shooting
par.
400 to 500 par on the bottom. Then
They're not
you're
getting it.
But the natural light that some of these corals get to get those colors is insane.
Yeah. Point being, a little LED bar, while it may work,
Yeah,
It's definitely not optimal.
but not gonna. And you know what? If you want to start with softies, and there are good ways to get supplemental lighting that will work for the time being, and then you can add. You know what I mean? Like I know that, like behind me, the Aquatic Life fixtures. You know, you get the T5s, and then you start with lower light, and then when you can afford, then you add. You know, whatever LED you want to in the middle. That's an option too. I know that Reef Brights does the same thing, where you can get, you know,
yeah, they got a
that-
fixture. Where you
yeah,
can
they
just
have
add
the
in.
fixture, and you can
Yep.
add to it as you grow in the hobby. So there are ways to do it progressively that way instead of getting, you know, something that was meant for a freshwater-ish tank.
And
that-
I think it comes back to of enjoyment. You know, you're gonna enjoy the hobby a lot more if you get like a nice light that you can control. It's easy adjustable. You know, it's gonna make your time as a reefer a lot better. It's gonna keep
Oh,
you in the hobby longer, and your tank's gonna look better for it at the same time too. So
I wanna touch a little bit on heaters.
yeah,
okay.
You know, just
Ooh.
I
Why
know.
heaters?
Well, because
Are you not hot enough?
Well, I think before you get into heaters, like, so how many watts per gallon would you for a heater? So I have, let's say we're gonna go with our most common size tank. I would say is that, you know, that in that Red Sea or water box or whatever, that, you know, 350
100
liters. So that
gallons.
175
Like a
to 100,
75
yeah,
gallon.
75 to 100 gallon tank. So you have a 75. So is a 100 watt heater good enough? Do you need a
I would-
8,000
I-
watt?
okay,
I would
so
use a
bef-
300 watt.
before we get into that, I think it's important to know what your house temp is, because if you keep your house
a lot of
consistently
variables.
warm or closer
Or
to
if you
78,
live in a warm climate,
yeah, or if you don't have central
That's a good
air or
point.
central heating, you're gonna need to adjust your heater size appropriately to that.
Well, yes and no, because if you look at it, if you adjust the heater to the size of the tank from the beginning,
Mhm.
whether you keep your house hotter or colder, it won't matter. The heater is automatic. If
Mhm.
it's too
That's
hot,
true.
it won't turn on.
Mhm.
If it's too cold, it will run longer. But it's already sized to your
But
tank.
for example, if you have a 75 gallon tank and you have a 50 watt heater in it, but you keep your house at 77 at all times, you're first of all, you're a crazy person for keeping it at 77. But that heater is going to have to work a lot less. So
Or if your tank is in the basement and you know in the winter it gets to, you know, you don't
Yeah.
heat
68.
it gets to 68, then you have a problem. But I'm going to go with 3 to 5 watts per gallon is the industry standard.
I don't think anybody's going to argue
I would
that
say,
fact
yeah.
here.
yeah, and when you're close to that 5 mark, the heater's going to be on for less time, I would say.
Yeah.
So 3 to 5 watts per gallon. So your 100 gallon tank, would you say 300? to
I said a
500 watt?
300 gallon.
I
a
have
300 watt.
I'm barely squeaking by with kind of a 300 in my 120. So
Yep.
yeah, that's kind of a little bit less. I would say
So
that's
then I
mid
think that's
twos,
where
but
that 3 to 5 watt
Yeah.
depends on, you know, the climate that you live in, the space that you're putting it in. Again, going back to that, where do you actually put these tanks, and,
Yeah.
and what do you need to do? I mean, the heater costs too. I mean, I'm gonna go on a limb and say your heater's one of your number one fail points.
and have 2 of them.
Yeah, redundancy for that is a big deal, and checking them. I mean, even in the summer versus the winter, some people in the summer, like I know in Minnesota, it's like the only time that it gets, you know, it's not 150 below zero. So people unplug their heaters and then forget, or then they'll plug them back in, and then, you know, there's algae buildup all
So-
over them and all that.
Maybe instead of having a 300 watt, maybe have 2 150s in
That's
case
an-
one goes out.
Or 2 200s or
You
But-
still have one.
I don't, I don't. Sometimes for those that stresses me out, because I feel like if one goes out, the 150 will never be enough to keep the other one going. And sometimes I feel like they're not accurate enough where they fight with each other. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I guess it just depends. Well, I have an Apex, so it just depends
That's
on
fair.
where you set your values when they turn on and off independently.
even if you're using like one of the independent like Inkbirds or, you know, the
Helio.
JBJ controllers, like as long as you set your temp properly, you know, they'll turn on and turn off. Obviously, if you have more wattage, it's going to turn on for a shorter amount of time and, you know, turn off quicker. So I think going over on wattage is always better than going under on wattage.
Because you can stagger them, or you can actually, if you don't have a problem with drawing power, you can have them turn on at the same time both.
That's true.
Or
Yeah.
or if you want to stagger them, you can have one start at, I don't know, 72, and then if it's not enough, the other one will start half a degree
75.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think also then we get into, I mean, and we have talked about it in a later podcast too. It's like ideal temperatures.
Yep.
Where do you want your tank to be? Because I know back in the day it was 78 to 82. And I would disagree that is, I mean, first of all, I'm going to, as a diver, the water's not 82 degrees. It's not 78 degrees even. So, I mean, I know for a lot of the corals that I keep, the LPS, the Scolies, they like cooler water temperatures. So I keep my tank around 60 or 76 to 78. At the highest, 77 would be that sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
I run mine currently at 78. I used to back in the day when I had my metal highlights, it was running at 82.
Oof.
And
yeah.
I never had an issue.
Yep.
But again,
Metal highlights.
Metal halides,
Yeah.
you kind of don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, so we'll get into that. I mean, and at a later date, the temperature argument. Back to picking the tank that works best for you and budgeting. I mean, we kind of talked about the equipment that you really need to consider when you're picking a budget.
Yep.
The one thing I don't think we touched on at all is the actual flow inside the tank, because that's another aspect that can, as far as expenditures, can be up there.
and
too.
that comes hand in hand with the type of coral you want to keep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of those that we underestimate the amount of flow that is needed in the tank in comparison to what is actually happening in the ocean. In the ocean, these things are getting just hit left and right
But-
all the way around.
But it's not constant
No.
either.
Yep.
Interesting enough, in the ocean, I think
I don't
there's
find
a
that
lot of
interesting
flow,
at all.
but it's hitting for different angles, and it's not like,
Direct.
there's a thing where it's kind of like gentle, a lot of gentle flow.
Yep.
At least that's what, unless you're like on the
On the reef crust, yeah.
the-
So it depends too. Like, I didn't realize that leather corals actually need a ton of flow, because when I was diving, I mean, these things are at the top. I mean, there's huge acroheads in the middle of the leathers, and they're getting pummeled. And a lot of those bigger colonies, you actually just look at the structure of the coral and you'll understand if the thicker the branches, generally speaking, the more flow that they absolutely need, because in the ocean, they're super thick because they can withstand that heavy flow. As if they were dainty and wispy, they'd never be able to
Handle
withstand
it,
that
yeah.
flow. So understanding, again, going back to what corals do you want to see in your, if you love, I mean, there's so many beautiful like torch tanks. I know are like kind of the big Euphilia gardens, and those they like a decent amount of flow, but it's indirect flow. So not having one power head pummeling the whole tank, but having several around in different areas, and then you'll find out over time as your corals grow, you'll have to adjust the flow anyway.
Yeah.
And an important thing to mention too is nutrient and algae control, making sure detritus is staying lifted or as much as you can
in suspension.
in suspension, and reducing the amount of algae that's able to grow on rocks and,
And being
glass.
filtered out too. I
Yep.
mean, you'll see a lot of these. I've seen a lot of deep tanks that we've taken over recently, where the there's a lot of flow up at that 50% of the top, and then at the bottom, I mean, you could do the test of dropping food and you see huge piles collect. That you definitely don't want that either.
No.
or the back of the rock where
Yes, exactly.
nothing back there.
Yep.
Stagnant
I mean,
zones.
it's not like a a porta potty where it gets emptied. It just sits there.
Yep. Well,
Well, there's
And I mean, I know that a lot of people want those amazing poop eating fish, but there really aren't. That's not a thing.
no.
poop eating
There-
fish.
People call all the time. Do you have those poop eating fish? They
Poop eating
think
fish.
like Plecostomus.
I was just gonna
Plecostomus
say.
don't eat poop.
Well, they eat poop.
Oh, they do.
No, they don't.
I
I have
know.
no idea.
So I mean, yeah, there's no poop eating fish, so we actually have to account for that as well. So sorry if you believed in poop eating fish and Santa, they're neither of them are real.
Well, I mean, there's one here and there fish that it's dumb enough to eat some other fish's poop.
I don't know. When my fish poop, I see all of them start to eat it. So
They
I don't-
might,
that-
but I mean,
that might just.
but again,
Yeah,
those
but then
fish
that one has to
poop,
poop.
and then there's still poop. So and corals poop, they all poop
Everybody poops.
except for my mom.
My wife doesn't poop either.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, that's why
Sorry,
She's
Steph.
I always tell my mom that's why she's full of, and I can't say it because she never poops.
Speaking of poop, skimmers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good topic. I think that's one of those other ones that's up there where you don't skimp out on. I think it's equally as important as lighting is, in my opinion, as skimmers, because that's going to make your life easier or way more a pain in the butt.
Yep. And also too, picking the size of the tank and then picking the skimmer that matches. When and looking at skimmers, I think that's one of those where you actually have to look at what they are rated for heavy, light. And so, I mean, generally speaking, a lot of them will come up with it's like it'll be the brand name and then 150. As a general rule, I always cut it in half. So if it says 150, I'd use it on a 75 gallon, or depending on whatever brand you. There's most of these companies break it down to what the specifics are for what kind of system.
That's where people make that mistake, because they have, let's say, a 75-gallon tank, and then they see that the skimmer is rated for light 75-gallon.
Yeah,
tank.
which means it's
like-
for like a nano tank.
It's like, no.
3-4 fish in it.
See,
Yeah.
If I always go with it says heavy, 75, then I probably
Yeah,
that's what I want.
and that's what you want. So picking the size that's going to give you all, because who wants a big tank with 3 fish? Nobody.
Nobody.
Well, there's probably someone out there that does, but then they can have the small skimmer. That's fine.
And then there's gonna be people out there gonna be like, well, I have a filter mat, so I don't need my skimmer.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're not going to even go there this time. So-
Oxygen is oxygen exchange. We'll just say
Yeah,
that.
so I
come
mean, again,
on.
so you're picking your tank.
Sore
so
subject.
you have your tank, you have your spot, or you have your size, your spot, and then your top four things that you need to consider: your return pump, your heater, your skimmer, and your lighting flow. Anything else that you need to really consider when you're adding for budgeting?
I think that's
I
the
think
big
those
one.
are the basics.
For equipment wise, I mean, then you can talk about, I mean, there's extra things too to obviously think about: test kits and all the maintenance stuff,
Mechanical filtration.
mechanical filtration.
Yeah.
And then it goes into so now you get this number. And then you're like, okay, then you're maxed out. Well, let's talk about what should your number be for, rock to scape it.
Ooh, that's a good call.
Then our sand that adds in there, salt
Bacteria,
adds
if
in
you're
there,
gonna do that.
bacteria,
Yep.
and then fish and corals. So I mean, you see where maybe that you want that 6 foot, but maybe that 4 foot is you can really have a beautiful fully stocked 4 foot instead of a really light stocked 6 foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, or if it's something that you're wanting to be patient about, then yeah, get that, because like we said, most people aren't going to say, oh, I wish it would have gone smaller, unless you're moving a lot. But I mean, you get that 6 foot, and if you have tons of patience to fill it, awesome. But if you are like the majority of people, they want it full, you need to think about, so what can you expect? Because a lot of people come in and they're like, oh, how much does $500 get me? How much does $1,000 get me?
Well, we have this 5-gallon here.
I think too, like if you're looking at between like a 4 foot and a 6 foot, for example, like I personally, and you guys might disagree with me on this, I would rather get the 6 foot and slowly piece together the pieces of equipment to that aquarium, and maybe not have everything at once, but 6 months down the road, or 4 months down the road, get that skimmer I really wanted.
I would,
and save for something
and
nice.
So if you are the, if you're the budgeter and you're the saver and you're realistic about that is, I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, but during
do
that
more
time,
maintenance during that time.
during that time, are you gonna have it
Running.
full or ready to go, or
Well,
running?
typically, if it's within like that 6 month time period, you wouldn't fully
But-
stocked with coral.
But I think
yeah.
that's where people that make that mistake, because they'll get that tank and they'll get the return pump, and that's all they have right now, and the sump. And then I'll be like, well.
Oh yeah, we
I
didn't
don't-
really talk about the filter because we
Nope.
assumed that they were generally like the water box
They
or
have the sump or
Right.
something
or
in
the
it.
Red Sea where the sumps are included. But for the other tanks, that's important too. Like, what size sump do you add? I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, and equipment too. You got to keep in mind, if you get an AIO, it's going to really limit you on equipment versus if you have a
Because
system
you
with a
need
sump.
you need the same amount of equipment, but now you have 6 inches by 24 or whatever it is to fit everything in there. So you need your auto top. Oh, we didn't talk about auto top offs either, but there's a whole bunch of other fun.
I would
Yeah.
consider
Well,
those
that's-
more of your like
Add-ons.
auxiliary
Yeah,
add-on
okay.
luxury
It'd
items.
be
But I
more
mean-
like if you don't want to be
Yep.
topping off.
Yeah.
I
your hand.
consider it a necessity, but also it's kind of a luxury too.
Yeah,
if you look
and
at it.
yeah. So, but I think sump size is a big thing to talk about, and why having the space or having the sumps match the size of your aquarium. And a lot of people, what they don't realize is if they go too small in that, you have to consider back siphoning.
Yep.
When you shut your system off, can it hold the water volume where it drops where the overflow reaches? That is, I mean, even with check valves, just like anything with salt water, unless you're checking those check valves on a daily or weekly basis, you don't want to rely on that as much. It's just a fail safe. But having the right size sump, that's how they rate them. It's not just because this tank needs a bigger one because it's bigger. It needs to take into consideration that, and also having the size sump for the equipment that you need. So, I mean, having it, and then you can go. I mean, you can modify them, you can retro them. You know, there's kits that you can do, but having the right size skimmer chamber, I think, is the number one thing.
Yeah.
Because if you have a super skinny small skimmer chamber, you can only put a super skinny small skimmer in there.
And considering whether or not you want a refugium, and
Yep.
also, if you're
No,
not
just
limited,
grower.
like you're keep in mind your sump's going to add water volume to your system too.
That's
So if you want to add more water volume, go with a bigger sump.
Be that crazy guy that puts a 36-inch sump with a 25 long
No, there you go.
display. I mean, it's not bad.
No,
Nope.
it's not.
Nope.
And if so I mean, I would go with bigger's better. Not only for water volume and extra adding to the system total volume, but again, for maintenance purposes. I mean, I'm coming from a maintenance background. When everything's super tight and you're trying to to become an acrobat to get your filter suck out, you're just
Yeah.
not going to do it.
Or if you
Yep.
can't remove your skimmer cup to clean it.
You're gonna avoid
that
it.
too. So that's the other thing: making sure you get the sump or get the equipment that you can get in and out of your tank as if it were going to fail or there's a leak, that you can get it out without having to like tear your tank down. That's a big deal too.
Yeah, a lot of people put their skimmer in and they
And then
It's there forever.
It's in there.
and once you put the water in, then you're like,
Wait,
oh,
how am I gonna get
how
this
am I gonna
out?
get this out? Well, that's fine. I'll just like,
as long as I can get the cup out, I don't need to clean the rest. And then
Yeah.
the pump goes out
and
or
then the
something.
pump goes
you're
out, and
sitting
then
there
how do you
like,
get that skimmer body out?
Yeah.
So that is a thing. So I would say too, and we'll talk about that before we'll talk about how to set up a tank. From taking it out of the box to adding water to all that. And that's one of the things is dry fitting everything first
Making
and then
sure it
filling
works.
with water.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because then you know what to expect. Because again, if you can't get it out to clean, maintain it, then that's just a problem in itself.
It's a recipe for disaster
It
right
is.
there.
It is.
Yeah, we should also maybe later on talk about the overflow boxes
And the size of those.
and how you shouldn't put the hang on back overflow box.
Hang on the back ones.
Oh
Oof,
yeah, and then the
yeah.
problems and how to fix them, and then also the
Yeah.
maintenance on them too. I mean,
the pain in the butt they are.
yeah. Just in general, there's some maintenance to do on any of them. I
Yep.
mean, keeping those teeth clean. I mean, people don't even realize, but you have intense lighting. A lot of them aren't covered, and they become little mini refugiums.
Yep.
Mhm.
And then that blocks flow too. So, I mean, those are all maintenance tips. But
And
having,
that's where our coral brushes come into play.
yeah, they actually work really good.
They
for
work-
a
that's
whole-
what I
for
use
a
them
whole
for.
bunch of
Yeah.
things. Like even things that aren't even fish tank related, I've used them.
I
Not to brush my
I
teeth.
brush my teeth with them too.
I don't.
They'd probably rip your gums off if you
They
tried
would.
brushing your teeth
And
with them.
especially the fine pieces.
Yep.
Those
Yeah.
are.
Oh,
Oh,
so
that
that's
would-
where all that blood comes from.
Yes.
Okay.
Not a good thing.
You might need to go to your dentist here.
Yeah. So back to
man.
pieces of equipment that you need when you're thinking about for your fish tank. So we talked about size matters. We talked about skimmers.
Do we want
talked
to talk about like
Like-
how much rock you need?
Oh yeah, rock. So a pound per gallon, no matter what, right?
No.
No,
That's a good baseline, but no.
no. I mean, because you see a lot of live rock is not a thing
Mhm.
much anymore. It's hard to get. And so a lot of that live rock was very porous and very light, whereas now the manufactured stuff
It's
now
heavy.
is heavy. So a pound per gallon, I mean, 100 pounds of that Pukani or man-made rock or whatnot
That
looks
was-
very different than 100 pounds of live rock.
Mhm.
Yep.
So I think then even that also goes into like what kind of corals you want, what your structure looks like for flow.
For all of
but
it.
I think getting it into that dollar amount of what your thoughts are on how many pounds per gallon. I mean, if you're going to be doing if you're going to be doing 75 to 100 gallons, I mean, you're going to want some decent pieces of rock in there.
Yeah. And, buy more than what you think you're going to need if you're aquascaping yourself, because you're probably going to break some pieces up. You're going to have different shape pieces. You want to have a little bit more flexibility to kind of make the aquascape that you really enjoy. It's one of those things that you're out of anything when you're setting up a tank, do that once and do it right, because it's a pain to go back and aquascape. So
it sucks to
spend your time with it.
And also too, I mean, a lot of those rocks, the manufactured rocks, have some phosphate.
Yep.
So it's not one of those things where you can add partial now, and then when you fill that side with corals or whatever, and then you add more later, because then you have to account for that phosphate spike, or just the changes that happen by doing that. I mean, you can add small pieces here and there, obviously, but getting your main structure down.
Well, having that opportunity to actually do your aquascape outside the tank, dry, glue it together, patch it, whatever.
Get an idea.
It's a big thing. Like, to me, it's nice when you don't have to get your hands wet.
Well, and I mean, using the glue and the accelerant. I mean, I've used the mud or the putty. I've used all that other stuff, and it's messy, and you can't do a lot of that. Like, I know that
the putty,
the Marco mud, you can't do underwater anyway. Nope. I've had no luck at it. But I mean, being able to use the glue and accelerant, you'd be amazed on how much weight that can hold, and you can make natural reef structures that you wouldn't be able to do if you had water in it too. So I mean, getting the rock too, and then there's also like, do you find someone that has a bunch of used rock or dry rock, and you have to think about that too, and then how you clean it if you're going to be doing that, because if you get a piece of live rock that's been sitting outside, you have to think about it's not just the rock, but all the stuff that died on it that you're adding to your tank too. So I mean, again, you're getting what you pay for. And then, do you want rock that has color to it? Do you want rock that's white to it? Always go with, you want to have as natural reef structure as possible. You don't want the snowman effect where you have big balls of rocks. It's like base, middle, top. I mean, that's not how corals grow.
It's called a rock snowman.
Yeah, rock snowman, and they suck to work with. So
or before on the back, all of it.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
The rock wall.
Build it out. Yep.
That's not what reefs look like either. So I mean, we can go through a whole bunch of different ways to aquascape, because it is truly an art. And I always laugh, or I tease myself, and I say people pay me tens of dollars to help aquascape their tanks. But I mean, it's something that I've learned through diving. For the most part, you look at what kind of corals you want, and then you build the structure around their natural growth patterns.
I think we need to go diving too.
Hey, speaking of things that are expensive that you need to buy.
Yeah, all of a sudden right now I need to buy a house in Indonesia, which I would in 5 minutes.
I mean, I thought I'd throw it out there.
I mean, you learn so much just from nature. But I mean, going back to, that's all we're doing is we're keeping this box of water, and everything we put in there, we need to make sure that the actual water is going to maintain whatever we put in there. So that's what all the equipment is. That's what picking the size of the aquarium. That's what it all has to do with that.
So I think we forgot one crucial thing.
Again.
Water. So you need to think about when you're getting
fair.
a new system, where are you going to get your water? Do you have an LFS that you're going to get RODI water from, or mixed salt water? Or are you going to need an RODI unit? If you're 2-3 hours away from your local fish store and you don't want to go to Walmart to get distilled water, you shouldn't
use distilled water anyway.
You should probably, get an RODI unit. So
yeah, and now versus 20 years ago, I mean, they're relatively inexpensive. So you can get nice units for a couple $100, and then to change the filters, between $5 and $30.
And that's one of those things too, where it's like, just invest in a good one. My first RODI unit was one of those cheapo, like $60 ones. You're going to spend more money swapping out the cartridges than you would on buying a nice unit.
Exactly. So, and then also too, one thing to think about, because I used to go and get water all of the time, even when because I was afraid that RODI, the units were like complicated. There are actually no moving parts to them. So literally you hook them up, and then you have your wastewater and your good water. I mean, it's as simple as that. It runs through all the different filters. But Think about weather, think about your back, think of all those other things. So there are great ways, which we can go through all the different like water stations and all that other fun stuff to think about. How to make your life so much easier. Because again, if it's difficult and you have to, walk in, 40 below and carry water out to your car and then back into your house, how often are you really going to do that?
You're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Well,
So that's another thing to add to the budget too, is RO units. And then generally speaking, using your own home RO unit isn't, the TDS or the total dissolved solids for a drinking unit versus aquarium use, totally different.
Yeah.
So we'll go into that. That's a whole nother topic. But
yep.
And it is another thing to maintain. So just keep that in mind too.
Yep.
You know, if you are a person who's right next to an LFS, maybe you'd
Yeah.
rather just go
or
get
if you have a 20-gallon tank and you only do, need 5
5
gallons, that's
gallons.
not a big deal. But
Yeah.
you have a 100-gallon tank and you're lugging 20 to 40 gallons, or there's an emergency, God forbid, and then you end up
Right.
having to need water immediately and lots of it.
and that's
So-
why
Yeah.
consider water storage too. So,
But so those are a couple other fun things to consider. So now it sounds like aquariums are a lot of pain in the butt, and that's just not it.
Well, I mean, you have to set up everything, but
Yep.
it's like anything, you build a house, it's going to be a pain in the butt in the beginning.
That's true.
But
And
once
there's-
it's done,
Yep.
ta-da.
And that's true. And that's what they say. Always focus on your most expensive
Yeah.
rooms or your kitchen and your bathroom, because those have all the essentials. So you're focusing on your sump and your lighting.
And
Yeah.
that's what I always tell people. It's like you can make this hobby as expensive or inexpensive as you want, but obviously there's pros and cons to
Yep.
each, and you're probably going to have more fun and better success if you just do a little bit more than what you think you're going to spend. So
right.
Yep.
So,
All right. I think we confused everybody and inspired everybody and all in between.
Yeah.
So, New Wave After Dark.
Have a good night, day, whatever time it is.
morning.
whatever
Week,
time you're
month,
listening
Yeah.
at,
Here.
Have a
or-
good one.
Have a good time.
Thanks.
and come into the store.
Oh yeah, shop online at newwaveaquaria.com. What was? Ah.